Thank you, Ashish. I'm going to start with sharing my screen. I'm going to talk about overall environmental sustainability of the ongoing energy transition in India. And I'll only be able to make a few points. There are, many issues involved in the energy transition with respect to the environmental and social aspects. But I'll focus on a few key things. Anyway, right now I'll address the first question which Ashish has raised, and that is uh, oh, what is the main pathway of the transition and what is our role in understanding and engaging with it? So I'll address this in a couple of minutes. So what is the main pathway, or what are the main things happening in the transition as we see it? First of all, I think we will see an increasing role of electricity in areas where it has conventionally not played a big role. For example, transport and in cooking. Of course, I think we will also see in India an increase, a continuous increase in the per capita energy use or consumption, whether it is in the form of electricity or any other source. And the role of electricity itself will increase. There is definitely a shift happening away from coal for a variety of reasons: cost, the impact, social, environmental impacts of coal. So we will see a reduction in the role, extent, and significance of coal in the supply side. But coal is not going to go away. And it will remain a significant source for at least 10 years, if not more. Some people talk about coal being a very significant part of our electric supply for 15 years, 20 years, some say 10 years. So I'm just saying that at least 10 years, we'll see a significant coal being significant. We will also see an increasing role of supply options like solar, particularly solar PV, maybe wind, combined with storage options like battery, pumped hydro. People are also talking about hydrogen, but we don't know maybe if that will be there in next 5 to 10 years, but at least some of these. So uh, we may also see a change in the role of hydropower. Um, Whether we see it as conventional hydropower or pumped hydro, um, uh, the role, whether hydro will increase or not, there is a lot of uncertainty around that. And the establishment or the government wants to, it has also plans for much higher role for hydro, both conventional and pumped hydro, pumped storage. But the economics of hydro and other impacts, I think, may decide it otherwise. So there is a uncertainty about how much role hydropower will be able to play. And then, as a part of the transition, many other related things are going to happen. Apart from the change in the source of electricity and energy and the generation, we will have changes in the institutional and the governance and regulatory structures, in the physical structures of transmission distribution systems. For example, if we have decentralized solar, then there is a the consumer is also partly the generator, so there is some change in the distribution systems. The complexity will increase. There will be impact on jobs. There will be cross-sectoral impacts. The impact of decline in coal on railways, on some of the other things, and of course in the social and environmental impacts. And I will talk a little bit about the last one in my presentation later on. The important point is that the direction, nature, and extent of many of these are not fully known. They will depend, of course, on the technological, economic, and financial factors, how they play out, how the technology develops, but also very critically on policy choices. So I think there is, uh, we do have a choice in where we will go, and I think that's the important point. Now, what is our role in engaging with this transition? Our work engages mainly with, as Ashish mentioned, the social and environmental impacts of coal-based power generation, especially its impacts on water. And here we have been looking at the entire coal chain, right from the mining of coal, washing, transport, burning of coal in the thermal power plants, disposal of the waste like ash and other waste disposal. So we have been looking at this entire chain. We have also been looking at the social and environmental impacts of hydropower. And along with that, we have also been looking at the larger picture of how the planning, regulation of coal and hydropower based power generation is happening. That's one part. Now, what is this presentation going to focus on? As I mentioned, there are many issues, but I'm going to focus only on one key issue. And that is, there are very real fears that the transition will leave us, and especially local communities. This whole transition will leave us saddled with the legacy of social, environmental, and health disasters. And my presentation will be focusing on this whole aspect. that how the transition will not only leave us, but the transition may be made as an excuse to evade responsibilities for all this. So I'll be talking about this in the next round. Thank you. Next question is the costs of these transitions and the pitfall risks and problems. And again, as I'd mentioned earlier, there are many, but I will be focusing on one particular set of problems or pitfalls. As I said, the transition is likely to leave with us a legacy of many social, environmental, and health disasters. And I will mention a few of them, or I'll talk about a few of them. So first of all, I think all of us know, or at least many of us have been confronted with this fact that ensuring the accountability for the social, environmental, and health impacts of coal and hydro, and others also, but because coal and hydro have been our large energy sources, ensuring the accountability for the social, environmental, and health impacts of coal and hydro is difficult, even when these projects are operational and the sector is thriving. Presumably when there is a lot of resources available in the sector, it's important that the sector remains functional. Those are the times when one sort of course, assumes that ensuring accountability will be easier. But even in such circumstances, ensuring accountability is very, very difficult. So when the transition is likely to happen, when there is a chance that, for example, these large sources of energy are being sort of phased out, or they are fading away, or they are becoming stranded assets, then it is almost sure that that will be used as an excuse to abdicate the responsibility and evade action on social and environmental impacts. For example, you can already see this. I'll give one example. In 2015, the Ministry of Environment notified new norms for emissions and water use for thermal power plants, and they were to be complied with in 2 years. Today, we are already in the 5th year, and there is hardly any compliance. And again, one of the sort of basic arguments that keeps being made is, already the costs of coal are very high, and if we add all these extra costs onto it, if we load on these costs to it, then it will be too much of a burden, and the people won't be able to afford the cost. And then we will have already there are so many NPAs, banks are not ready to finance this installation of pollution control equipment. So and even if they do install it, we won't be able to pay it back. The sector PLFs are the plant load factors are already down, so we cannot put this burden onto the sector. This is a big argument, and I think we will be seeing this argument everywhere, that already the sector is in the decline. It cannot take the burden of addressing the social and environmental impact. So that is a very big risk that is likely to happen. So there is a very real fear that the transition will leave us, that is all of us, and particularly the local communities, saddled with legacies of social and environmental disasters. And I want to show a few of them. So first of all, abandoned ash ponds and ash dumps. I think all of us know that coal-fired power plants, which is the biggest source of electricity in this country, generate huge amounts of ash after the coal is burnt, and that's the biggest problem. And anybody who has been to thermal power plants areas will see, typically you will have what are called as ash ponds or ash dikes, which is nothing but fly ash mixed with water dumped. It's basically a dump. It's a wet dump, and there will be dry dumps, and it's just thrown there. Now, this is a picture from Korba, by the way. So ash generated by coal plants is almost 3 times the total municipal solid waste in this country. Last year, we generated more than 200 million tons of fly ash. Okay, and the law requires actually 100% utilization of this ash, but compliance is really widespread. There is gross non-compliance, and therefore, as a result, what we have is thousands of hectares and millions and tons of ash is being just thrown all over in the country. This is again another ash dump. This is a dry one. This is dried up because the water has evaporated, and then therefore because of that all kinds of things can happen. The ash will fly off in the form of dust. So these ash ponds continue to pollute water because from the wet ones, the contaminants including heavy metals leach into the groundwater, leach into the surface water. Ash ponds breach and contaminate land and water. The dry ash ponds, the wind will take the ash from the dry ash ponds, and that will result in dust pollution. So all kinds of things are happening. Unfortunately, there are no plans, no funds to handle this ash uh, when individual plants are being phased out. So even now, the ash, it's being difficult to handle this ash. What will happen when some of the plants are being commissioned, decommissioned, or they become stranded assets and they are no longer functional? What is going to happen to all this ash is a big question, and there are no funds, there is nothing, no way of, no plans to handle this. To give you the macro picture, uh, how much is the ash that has been what I call legacy ash, how much of that is sitting around in the country? So if you look at this graph, which I have prepared from the data from Central Electricity Authority, these three lines, I hope you can see the mouse. The red one is the fly ash which is generated every year, and I've given the amounts for every year. And the green is the one which is actually being utilized as against 100% utilization. So you have the the sort of green line which shows how much of ash was utilized in that year, and the purple one is the difference between the two, where which means it's unutilized, and that keeps adding to the ash, and cumulative accumulation of ash is, as you can see in the country, is close to 1.5 billion tons of ash, which is now lying around everywhere in the country, and we are adding some million tons to this every year, tens of million tons of this to every year. This is more than 1 ton of ash per every person in this country, man, woman, transgender, child, anything. Then, apart from the ash, you can also see that mining of coal is a hugely impactful activity, which results in the overburdened dumps. Coal is often washed to reduce the ash content, and you have the washery rejects, which is called as basically the, coal with the lesser ash content is called so-called clean coal, but what is remaining is a coal with very high ash content is called dirty coal. These scenes are very typical of coal mining area, where rock that is removed to go get to the coal. Now, in theory, this is supposed to be filled back into the mine when the mine is reclaimed or closed, but most of the times that doesn't happen at all. This is a pile of washery rejects, and again, what has happening is with this kind of piles, you have leaching of the contaminants happening from this. You have dust pollution from this. You have spontaneous combustion. So you can, because a lot of these mining rejects or overburden also contain bits of coal.
Shripad, a minute
So
or
you
two
can
more,
see
please.
some of this happening. And as yeah, as I said, I may take a minute or two more in this and
Oh yeah,
less in
okay.
the next
Sorry,
one.
go on. Yeah.
So as you can see that, yeah, as you can see that uh, again, as mines close down or as coal is phased out, all this is just going to hang around, and this is what has been happening in spite of existing mine closure plans and all. These things just are, dumped as a legacy. The last one I want to talk about is a land grab. Again, as we know, what happens is when anytime a power plant is announced, the first thing that happens is land is required for that. And we know very well that you don't need the environment clearance, or you don't need anything else for acquiring the land. The land is acquired, and then what happens when the plant doesn't go on or the plant becomes stranded? What happens to that land? When the plant suppose stops generating. To give you an example, this is a photograph which we took in 2014 of the Coastal Andhra Pradesh Power Limited, which is basically the Krishnapatnam UMPP, a 4,000 megawatt plant which Reliance Power was supposed to build. They acquired the land in 2008. Around 2008, more than 2,000 acres of land they acquired. The land was nothing; it was just fenced up with a wall around it. And this is a satellite imagery from 2020. The land, almost 2,000 acres of it, is still lying around like that. So what happens to the people from whom this land was acquired? What happens to those for whom this land was common property resources? And the land is just grabbed by these power projects. So this is a very big question, and this is a big question because there are many power plants which are closed and land was acquired, but the land is still lying there. And as we go further, even plant which was functional plant, if the plant becomes a stranded asset, stops generating, what happens to the land is a very big question. So just to sum up, this is, I only have given a few examples, but when you look at the legacy of social, environmental, and health disasters, you have abandoned ash ponds and ash dams. We talked about them. You have polluted streams, rivers, and groundwater. Particularly the ash ponds and everything. It leaves aquifers which are, polluted, and there is no way that you can remove the pollution. You have depleted groundwater aquifers due to mines. I think this is a big impact of much of the mining, because much of the mining is basically, you're digging a huge hole into the ground. It's like digging a big well. So the, groundwater from all the surrounding areas is into the mine. And, the mine remains there, and the aquifers remain dewatered, which of course also affects the communities. You have the cratered landscapes, you have acidified mine waters, you have washery reject piles, and you have communities with serious health disorders, because all this impacts the health of the communities, and it'll keep impacting years and years after the mine is no longer functional or the power plant has shut down. So this is the legacy that is there, and of course land which is being grabbed. So these are some of the legacy issues that we have to deal with when we talk about the transition. At the same time, I want to point out to you to the other end of the transition. So on one end, we have sources like coal, which are likely to reduce in their role, and therefore there will be less resources and less attention to address their legacy issues. At the same time, these new sources, which are supposed to be much better in terms of the renewable sources like solar, and I think Bhargavi has already alluded to some of that, what happens with the solar plants. So first thing is there is a lack of credible and independent environment impact assessments or social impact assessment, health impact assessments. Solar, wind, the new resources are not even included in the EIA notification. There is absence of people's participation in the whole process, and these are very typical to all the conventional resources, and we are carrying them over to the new sources of power. Forcible land acquisition, and we are ignoring locational criterias, because we just look at, okay, if you want to look at a solar plant, where is the maximum insolation, but what about other places? Is it ecologically sensitive area? What about the water resources there? So these are all the kinds of we are in a way perpetuating the bad practices, which again is going to result in a lot of social and environmental impacts of the transition, unless we manage the transition in a way that we put an end to the bad practices when we are looking at new resources. Thank you.